The dust kicked up beneath Penelope Nash's worn boots as she stepped down from the stagecoach in Oroville, California, clutching her late father's leather satchel with both hands like it contained all the hope she had left in the world. The year was 1878, and at 22 years old, she had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis to claim the general store her father had won in a poker game 6 months before his death. Determined to make something of herself in this rough Sierra Nevada foothills town, where gold fever had long since cooled but stubborn dreamers remained. The main street stretched before her like a challenge, lined with false-fronted buildings that cast long shadows in the afternoon sun, and she squared her shoulders despite the exhaustion weighing down every bone in her body. "Miss Nash." A smooth voice called out, and Penelope turned to see a man in an expensive suit approaching, his dark hair slicked back with pomade, a gold watch chain glinting across his vest. "I heard you'd be arriving today. Mortimer Lansing, purveyor of fine goods and equipment." He extended a hand with manicured nails, his smile revealing teeth that seemed too white, too perfect. Penelope shook his hand cautiously. "Mr. Lansing, I appreciate the welcome, but I need to find my father's store first. That old place on 3rd Street. Lansing's laugh was practiced, calculated. "Well, that's precisely why I'm here, Miss Nash. Your father, God rest his soul, had placed an order with me before his passing. Premium goods for stocking a general store. I've been holding them for months, and frankly, storage costs money. I thought we might conclude our business arrangement today. Get you set up properly." Something in his eagerness made Penelope's stomach tighten, but she was tired and overwhelmed, and the thought of having inventory ready to sell was appealing. "I would need to see what you're offering, Mr. Lansing, and the prices." Of course. A shrewd businesswoman, I see. Why don't you get settled and I'll bring samples by tomorrow morning, say 9 o'clock. His eyes gleamed with something that might have been triumph, or might have been simple enthusiasm, but Penelope couldn't quite tell which. She agreed, and Lansing tipped his hat before disappearing into a saloon across the street. Penelope picked up her trunk and made her way down the dusty street, asking directions from a woman sweeping her porch, until she found the narrow building wedged between a barber shop and a boarding house. The sign hanging crooked above the door read Nash General Store in faded letters, and her heart squeezed seeing her family name painted there. The interior smelled of dust and abandonment. Shelves stood empty like skeleton ribs, and mouse droppings scattered across the wooden floor. A pot-bellied stove sat cold in one corner, and behind the counter, a narrow staircase led up to what she hoped would be living quarters. Penelope set down her trunk and looked around at the enormous task ahead of her, fighting back tears that would do her no good. Her father had believed this place could be something. She would make it so. That night, after sweeping and scrubbing until her hands were raw, Penelope lay on the dusty mattress upstairs and listened to the sounds of Oroville settling into evening. Piano music drifted from somewhere down the street, men's laughter, the occasional bark of a dog. She thought of her mother's grave back in St. Louis, of her father's gambling habit that had somehow, miraculously, left her with this one possibility. Sleep came slowly, filled with anxious dreams of empty shelves and customers who never came. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the grimy windows. Penelope washed her face in the basin, changed into her other dress, a practical brown cotton that had seen better days, and braided her dark blonde hair into a coronet around her head. She was examining the store's account books, which showed nothing but debts, when Mortimer Lansing arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, accompanied by 2 men carrying wooden crates. "Miss Nash, I've brought samples of the finest merchandise available west of the Mississippi." Lansing gestured grandly as his men set down the crates. Tools, dry goods, canned provisions, cookware, everything a general store needs to thrive. He pried open the first crate and began pulling out items with the practiced flourish of a magician. Tin cups, allegedly copper-bottomed. Rope that he claimed could hold 1,000 pounds. Axes with heads he swore were tempered steel from Pittsburgh. Bolts of fabric in cheerful calico prints. Sacks of flour and sugar. Tins of coffee and tea. As he laid each item on the counter, he quoted prices that made Penelope's head spin. "Mr. Lansing, this is more than I expected to spend," she said carefully, adding numbers in her head. "And I would need to examine the quality more closely before committing to such a large order." "Quality? My dear Miss Nash, I guarantee every item personally. These aren't the usual frontier goods you find in most establishments. This is premium merchandise for discerning customers." His smile never wavered, but something in his eyes hardened. "As for the price, I'm offering you the same terms I gave your father 30 days credit. You'll have made the money back twice over by then." Penelope picked up one of the axes, testing the weight. It seemed solid enough, though she had no real experience judging such things. Her father had run a dry goods shop in St. Louis, not a frontier general store. She was out of her depth, and Lansing knew it. "I'll need time to think about this," she said, setting the axe down. "Time is money, Miss Nash. I have other customers waiting for these goods. If you're not interested, I'm sure the Hendersons over in Chico would jump at this opportunity." Lansing began repacking items with theatrical reluctance. Of course, that would leave you with empty shelves and no inventory. Hard to run a store with nothing to sell. The pressure tactic was obvious, but it worked on Penelope's fears nonetheless. She needed stock, and she needed it now. Every day the store stayed empty was a day she burned through her meager savings on food and lamp oil. But something whispered caution in her mind, some instinct inherited from her mother who had always been the practical one. "Tomorrow," Penelope said firmly. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow morning. That's fair, isn't it?" Lansing's smile tightened around the edges. "Tomorrow it is, Miss Nash, but I really must have a decision by then. Business waits for no one, especially in California." He tipped his hat and left with his men and crates, leaving Penelope standing in the empty store feeling like she had just narrowly avoided a trap without being sure what kind. She spent the rest of the morning sweeping and organizing the empty shelves, trying to imagine them filled with goods, trying to calculate how much profit she would need to make to pay back credit and still survive. The numbers never quite worked in her favor. By noon, she was hungry and discouraged, and she locked the store to walk to the nearest restaurant, a small place advertising hot meals and reasonable prices. The restaurant was half full with miners and laborers eating lunch. Penelope ordered beef stew and cornbread, settling at a small table by the window where she could watch the street. She was halfway through her meal when the door opened and a man had to duck slightly to enter, his shoulders nearly spanning the doorframe. Penelope found herself staring despite her better manners. The man was enormous, easily 6.5 feet tall, with a chest and arms that strained against his faded blue work shirt. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, streaked with sun-lightened strands, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale gray like morning fog, scanning the room with the wariness of someone who spent more time with mountains than people. He moved with surprising grace for his size, his boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor despite his obvious weight in solid muscle. He ordered food at the counter, his voice a deep rumble, then turned to find a seat. Those gray eyes landed on Penelope, and she quickly looked down at her stew, feeling heat rise in her cheeks at being caught staring. But there were few empty tables, and she heard his footsteps approaching. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, and she looked up to find him standing by her table, hat in his hands, his expression polite but distant. "Please," Penelope said, gesturing to the chair across from her. It seemed silly to refuse when the restaurant was filling up with the lunch crowd. He sat carefully, as if conscious of his size in the small chair. Up close, Penelope could see scars on his hands, the weathered tan of someone who lived outdoors, the way his eyes kept flicking to the door and windows like he was always tracking exits. This was not a man comfortable in town. "You're new," he said after a moment, not quite a question. "I arrived yesterday. I'm Penelope Nash. I inherited the general store on 3rd Street. She offered a small smile. "And you are Xander Colton." He accepted the plate of food the owner's daughter brought over, nodding his thanks. "I live up in the mountains, only come to town for supplies every few weeks." "What do you do up there?" Penelope asked, curious despite herself. "Trap mostly, some hunting. I have a cabin near Feather Falls." He cut into his steak with economical movements. "Quieter than town." "I can imagine." Penelope found herself relaxing slightly. There was something straightforward about Xander Colton, a lack of artifice that contrasted sharply with Mortimer Lansing's oily charm. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" "5 years, give or take. Came out here after the war." He didn't elaborate on which side he had fought for, and Penelope didn't ask. The war had ended 13 years ago, but its scars still ran deep. "These mountains suit me better than cities." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Penelope found herself sneaking glances at him, fascinated by the sheer size of the man. His forearms, visible where he had rolled up his sleeves, were corded with muscle and covered in more scars. These were hands that worked hard, that built and trapped and survived in wilderness that would kill softer men. "You planning to run that store yourself?" Xander asked suddenly, his gray eyes meeting hers with unexpected directness. "I am. I don't have much choice in the matter." Penelope set down her spoon. "My father won it in a card game. He died before he could come claim it, so here I am." "That's rough." His voice carried genuine sympathy. "You know anything about running a frontier store?" "Not much," Penelope admitted. "My father had a shop in St. Louis, but it was different. Fancier goods, city customers. This." She gestured vaguely toward the street. "This is all new to me." Xander nodded slowly, chewing thoughtfully. "You bought inventory yet?" "There's a salesman, Mortimer Lansing. He claims my father ordered goods from him. He wants me to buy everything tomorrow on credit." The words tumbled out before Penelope could stop them. "It seems like a good offer, but something feels wrong about it. Am I just being paranoid?" Xander's expression darkened, his jaw tightening beneath his beard. "Lansing. Yeah, I know him. He sold a trapper up near my place a rifle last year. Thing exploded the first time the man fired it, took 2 fingers clean off. Lansing claimed it was user error, refused to refund the money." He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "Whatever he's offering you, don't buy it. His goods are cheap trash dressed up with fancy words." Penelope's stomach dropped. "Are you certain?" "I've seen too many people burned by him. He targets newcomers, folks who don't know better. Sells them junk at premium prices, then disappears when things fall apart." Xander's hands clenched into fists on the table. "You sign that credit agreement and you'll be in debt for merchandise that'll break the first time someone uses it. Then you'll have angry customers and no money to make it right." "Dear God." Penelope pressed a hand to her forehead, feeling sick. "I almost agreed to it. I was so desperate to get the store running that I nearly fell for it completely." "Don't blame yourself. He's good at what he does. That's why he's still in business." Xander finished his steak and pushed the plate aside. "You need real goods. You need to go to Sacramento or San Francisco. Buy direct from reputable suppliers, not middlemen like Lansing. I don't have money for a trip like that or time. Penelope heard the desperation in her own voice. I need inventory now. Every day that store sits empty, I'm losing money. Xander was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. Finally, he said, I'm heading into Sacramento in 3 days. Supply run. You could come with me, buy what you need directly. I know the honest dealers, the ones who sell quality goods at fair prices. I could help you inspect everything, make sure you're not getting cheated. Penelope blinked in surprise. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Because Lansing is a snake, and I'm tired of watching him prey on decent people. Xander's voice was firm. And because you seem like you're trying to make an honest go of things. That's rare enough to be worth helping. I couldn't possibly impose on you like that, Penelope protested, even as hope flickered in her chest. It's not an imposition. I'm making the trip anyway and I know the roads. It's safer traveling in pairs. He stood, dropping coins on the table for his meal. Think about it. If you want to come, meet me at the livery stable Wednesday morning at dawn. I'll have supplies and gear for both of us. Before Penelope could respond, he was gone, his massive frame disappearing through the door with that same quiet grace. She sat staring after him, her mind racing. A cross-country trip with a man she had just met seemed reckless, but what was the alternative? Trust Mortimer Lansing's smooth lies and end up in debt with worthless goods. At least Xander Colton had been honest with her, had warned her away from a bad deal without asking for anything in return. That afternoon, when Lansing stopped by the store to press for an early answer, Penelope told him she needed more time to review her finances. His displeasure was barely concealed, but he left with promises to return the next morning. The moment he was gone, Penelope made her decision. She would take her chances with the mountain man. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Penelope used what little money she had to buy sturdy traveling clothes and boots, a bedroll, and basic provisions. She told her landlady, Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house next door, that she would be gone for a week or so on a buying trip. Mrs. Chen, a sharp-eyed woman who had survived the gold rush and 2 husbands, nodded approvingly. You're smart not to trust that Lansing fellow, Mrs. Chen said, her accent still thick despite 20 years in California. He sold my cousin a stove that rusted through in a month. You go with Xander Colton instead. That man has honor, rough around the edges, but he keeps his word. When Mortimer Lansing arrived Wednesday morning to find the store locked and Penelope gone, his curses could be heard 3 buildings down. But by then, Penelope was already riding out of Oroville on a sturdy bay mare, with Xander Colton on a massive black gelding beside her, and the rising sun painting the mountains gold before them. The journey to Sacramento would take 3 days each direction, traveling through foothills that gradually descended toward the valley. Xander set a steady pace, neither too fast nor too slow, and Penelope found herself grateful for his consideration. She was a decent rider but not an expert, and the terrain was new to her. They rode in silence for the first hour, Penelope too nervous to start conversation, and Xander seemingly content with quiet. But as the morning warmed and the trail took them through stands of oak and pine, she found her courage. Thank you for doing this, she said. I know you said it wasn't an imposition, but I'm grateful nonetheless. You don't need to keep thanking me. Xander's eyes scanned the trees around them, always watchful. I meant what I said. Lansing needs to be stopped or at least countered. If I can help someone avoid his schemes, that's reason enough. Mrs. Chen said you're an honorable man. A ghost of a smile touched his bearded face. Mrs. Chen is generous in her assessment. I'm just a man who prefers straight dealing to lies. That puts you ahead of most people I've met. Penelope adjusted her seat in the saddle, already feeling the burn in her legs. Can I ask you something? Why do you live alone up in the mountains? It seems like a hard life. Xander was quiet for so long that Penelope thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, I was a different person during the war, did things I'm not proud of, saw things that changed me. Afterward, I tried to go back to normal life to fit into society, but I couldn't. Everything felt wrong, too loud, too complicated. One day I just headed west and kept going until I found a place that felt right. That place was the mountains. Do you ever regret it? The isolation? Sometimes, he admitted. Especially during winter when the snow comes and I don't see another soul for months. But then spring arrives and I remember why I chose this. The peace, the simplicity. No one asking me to be something I'm not. Penelope understood that more than he knew. She had felt the same way in St. Louis after her mother died, surrounded by people who wanted her to grieve a certain way, to be a certain kind of daughter. Coming to California had been as much about escape as opportunity. They stopped for lunch beside a clear stream, where Xander showed her how to filter water through charcoal and sand to make it safe for drinking. He moved with the efficiency of long practice, and Penelope found herself watching the way his hands worked, strong and capable, building a small fire and heating coffee in a battered tin pot. You're staring again, Xander said without looking up, but there was amusement in his voice. Penelope felt heat flood her face. I apologize, it's just that you're so competent at all of this. I feel useless by comparison. You're not useless. You're learning. That's different. He poured coffee into 2 cups and handed her one. Besides, I can't run a general store to save my life. Everyone has their own skills. What will you need to buy in Sacramento? Penelope asked, sipping the strong, bitter coffee. Ammunition, mostly. Some sugar and salt, a few yards of canvas for repairs. Medicine supplies. I try to buy in bulk so I don't have to make the trip more than twice a year. He settled against a tree trunk, his long legs stretched out before him. The less time I spend in cities, the better I like it. You really don't enjoy being around people, do you? Not most people, no. They talk too much, usually about nothing that matters. And they want things from you, always something. His gray eyes met hers. You're different, though. You talk, but you also listen. And you haven't asked me for anything I haven't offered. Is that why you offered to help me? Partly. Xander took a long drink of his coffee. Also because you reminded me of my sister. She had that same determined look in her eyes when she decided she was going to do something impossible. Had, Penelope asked softly. Fever took her when she was 19, long time ago now. The pain in his voice was old but still present. She was stubborn as hell. Would have liked you, I think. They sat in comfortable silence after that, finishing their coffee while the horses drank from the stream and birds sang in the trees overhead. Penelope felt something shifting inside her, a recognition that Xander Colton was perhaps the most genuine person she had met in California so far. His gruffness was armor, not cruelty, and beneath it lay a deep well of decency. The afternoon brought them to a small settlement where Xander knew the owner of a trading post. They camped behind the building that night, and the owner's wife brought them fresh bread and stew, refusing payment with the firmness of someone who recognized Xander as a friend. Penelope slept in her bedroll under a sky full of stars, listening to Xander's steady breathing from where he had laid out his own blankets a respectful distance away, and she felt safer than she had in months. The second day of travel took them down into the valley, where the air grew warmer and the terrain flattened into farmland. Xander told her stories about the mountains as they rode. about tracking elk through snow, about a bear that had tried to break into his cabin one winter, about the beauty of Feather Falls when the spring melt turned it into a thundering white cascade. "I would like to see that someday," Penelope said, and Xander glanced at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Maybe you will," was all he said. They reached Sacramento on the third day, and Penelope was overwhelmed by the size of the city. Compared to St. Louis, it was still small, but after Oroville and days on the trail, it felt enormous and chaotic. Xander navigated the streets with surprising confidence, leading her to a hotel where he paid for 2 rooms without consulting her. "You can pay me back after you've bought your goods," he said when she protested. "Right now, you need to conserve your money for inventory." The next morning, he took her to a wholesale merchant he trusted, a balding man named Henderson who greeted Xander with genuine warmth. "Colton, good to see you didn't get yourself killed by a bear since last time. What can I do for you? My friend here needs to stock a general store. I need you to sell her quality goods at honest prices, and I'm going to inspect every single item before she buys it." Xander's tone was friendly but firm. Henderson laughed. "Your friend is lucky to have you. Come on, let me show you what I have in stock." For the next 3 hours, Xander examined everything Penelope considered buying. He tested ropes by suspending his own considerable weight from them. He struck axes against hardwood to check for chips or weak spots in the heads. He inspected fabric for moth holes and uneven weaving. He opened every tin of food and smelled the contents to ensure freshness. He checked flour for weevils and beans for mold. When Henderson tried to sell them a batch of tin cups with thin bottoms that would burn food, Xander rejected them immediately and demanded better quality. "Your mountain man is thorough," Henderson said to Penelope with a grin. "I've never had anyone inspect goods so carefully." "I want her to succeed," Xander said simply. "That means selling products that won't break or spoil the moment she gets them home." By afternoon, they had assembled a solid inventory. Tools that would last, dry goods that were genuinely fresh, cookware that was properly made, fabric that would hold up to frontier use, and various sundries that Henderson promised were his most reliable items. The total cost was substantial but fair, well within Penelope's budget, and Henderson agreed to have everything packed and ready for pickup the next morning. "You'll need a wagon," Xander said as they walked back to the hotel. "We can't carry all that on horseback." "I know a man who sells good used ones." The wagon was purchased that afternoon, along with a sturdy mule to pull it. Xander went over the wagon inch by inch, checking the axles, the wheel spokes, the condition of the hitch. He found a crack in one of the boards and negotiated a lower price before agreeing to the purchase. That evening, Xander insisted on buying Penelope dinner at a proper restaurant, a place with white tablecloths and candles. "You've been eating trail food for days. You deserve something better." Penelope protested that he had already done too much, but Xander simply pulled out a chair for her with that quiet stubbornness she was beginning to recognize. They ordered roast chicken and vegetables, fresh bread with butter, apple pie for dessert. It was the finest meal Penelope had eaten since leaving St. Louis. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said between bites of chicken that was tender and perfectly seasoned. Xander looked wary but nodded. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer. Why did you never marry?" "A man like you, capable and decent, I would think women would be interested." Penelope felt bold asking, but the wine with dinner had loosened her tongue slightly. Xander was quiet for a long moment. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "After the war, I was a mess. Couldn't sleep, couldn't hold a conversation without losing my temper. What woman would want that? By the time I got myself sorted out living in the mountains, I was too far from civilization to meet anyone, and the few times I've come to town and women have been interested." He shrugged. "I don't fit in their world. I don't want to go to dances or social gatherings. I can't make small talk. I would make any woman miserable." "I don't think that's true," Penelope said softly. "You just haven't met the right woman. Someone who understands that there are different ways to live, that not everyone wants the same things from life." His gray eyes met hers across the table, and something passed between them, a recognition that made Penelope's heart beat faster. "Maybe," Xander said quietly. "Or maybe some men are meant to live alone." "I don't believe that," Penelope said. "I think some men just need more time to heal before they're ready to let someone in." Xander looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the candlelight. Finally, he said, "You're a remarkable woman, Penelope Nash. Your store is going to succeed because you have the sense to ask for help and the courage to trust your instincts. Don't let anyone tell you different." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness in his words. "Thank you, Xander, for everything. I wouldn't have known where to start without you. You would have figured it out. You're smart." He finished his chicken and set down his fork, "But I'm glad I could help make it easier." They walked back to the hotel through streets lit by gas lamps, and Penelope found herself acutely aware of Xander beside her, the solid presence of him, the way his hand hovered near her elbow to steady her over rough patches in the road without actually touching her unless necessary. When they reached her door, he paused. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow. It'll take us 4 days to get back with the loaded wagon, maybe 5 if we have trouble." His voice was gruff, like he was uncomfortable with goodbyes, even temporary ones. "I'll be ready." Penelope hesitated, then acted on impulse, standing on her toes to kiss his bearded cheek. "Thank you, Xander, truly." She slipped inside her room before she could see his reaction, her heart pounding. It was forward of her, improper even, but she didn't care. Xander Colton had shown her more honest kindness in 3 days than most people showed in a lifetime, and she wanted him to know it mattered to her. The journey back to Oroville was slower with the loaded wagon, but the weather held fair and the roads stayed dry. Xander drove the wagon while Penelope rode her mare beside him, and they fell into easy conversation. He taught her about the plants they passed, which ones were edible, which ones could be used for medicine. She told him about St. Louis, about her parents, about her dream of making the general store into something her father would have been proud of. "He would be proud already," Xander said. "You crossed a continent by yourself and you're building something from nothing. That takes guts." On the 4th night, they camped beside a river where the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Xander caught fish with his hands, moving with patient stillness in the shallows until he could strike, and they cooked them over the fire with salt and wild herbs he gathered. "Where did you learn to do all this?" Penelope asked, watching him work with practiced ease. "My grandfather. He was a mountain man, the old-fashioned kind. He used to take me and my sister out into the wilderness when we were kids, teach us how to survive with nothing but a knife and our wits." Xander turned the fish on the flat stone he was using as a griddle. "Best times of my childhood. I think that's why I went back to it after the war. It reminded me of when things were simple." "You think you'll ever come back to live in town?" Penelope asked, though the thought of him leaving the mountains made her unaccountably sad. "I don't know. Maybe someday if I had a reason to." He glanced at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "What about you? Think you'll stay in Oroville, or will you move on once you've made your fortune?" "I like Oroville," Penelope said honestly. "It's small enough to feel like home but big enough to have opportunity, and the mountains around it." She looked up at the peaks silhouetted against the darkening sky. "I'm starting to understand why you love them." They get in your blood, Xander agreed. Once you've lived with real wilderness around you, cities start to feel like cages. They ate the fish as stars appeared overhead, and Penelope felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. There was something about being here in this place, with this man, that felt profoundly right. She didn't know what to do with that feeling, so she simply let it exist, warm and steady in her chest. "Penelope," Xander said after they had finished eating and were sitting by the dying fire. "Can I ask you something, of course? That kiss yesterday, did you mean it or were you just being kind?" His voice was careful, uncertain in a way she had never heard from him before. Penelope felt her cheeks heat. "I meant it. You've been so good to me, Xander. I wanted you to know that I see that I appreciate you. Just appreciation." His gray eyes reflected firelight as he looked at her. "No," Penelope admitted, her heart racing. "Not just appreciation. I like you, Xander, more than I probably should after knowing you less than a week." He was quiet for a long moment, and Penelope feared she had made a terrible mistake. Then he said, "I like you too, more than I expected to like anyone, and that scares the hell out of me." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I don't know how to do this. I've been alone so long that I don't know how to be with someone, and you deserve better than a half-wild mountain man who doesn't know how to live in the world anymore." His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "You deserve someone who can give you a normal life." Penelope moved closer to him, closing the distance between them. "What if I don't want normal? What if I want someone honest and kind and brave, someone who would travel 3 days to help a stranger buy goods without expecting anything in return? What if that's enough, Penelope?" Her name was almost a groan. "I'm not asking you to be something you're not, Xander. I'm just saying that what you are is already more than enough." She reached out and took one of his clenched fists, carefully uncurling his fingers until his hand lay open in hers. "You don't have to do anything about this. I just wanted you to know." Xander looked down at their joined hands, his expression torn between hope and fear. Then slowly, carefully, he turned his hand to grip hers properly, his calloused palm warm against her smaller one. "I want to do something about it, I just don't know what. We could start by being honest with each other. No games, no pretending, just truth." Penelope squeezed his hand. "Can we do that?" "Yes." The word was firm, decisive. "I can do honest." They sat holding hands by the fire until the embers burned down to ash, talking quietly about their fears and hopes, about what they wanted from life. Xander admitted that he was lonely sometimes, that the mountains were beautiful but cold comfort on long winter nights. Penelope confessed that she was terrified of failing, of losing the store and having nothing left. "You won't fail," Xander said with absolute certainty. "You're too stubborn," Penelope laughed. "Is that a compliment? From me it is. Stubbornness is what keeps people alive out here." When they finally retreated to their separate bedrolls, Penelope lay awake for a long time, thinking about the feel of Xander's hand in hers, the sound of his voice when he said her name. She was falling for him, she realized. Falling hard and fast for a mountain man who lived alone in the wilderness and didn't know how to be with people. It was impractical and probably foolish, but her heart didn't seem to care about practicality. They reached Oroville late on the 5th day, the wagon rolling down Main Street with its precious cargo of quality goods. Mrs. Chen came out of the boarding house with a wide smile. "You're back, and with a full wagon. Good, good." Xander helped Penelope unload everything into the store, carrying heavy crates like they weighed nothing, his muscles flexing beneath his shirt. It took hours to get everything inside and properly organized, but by nightfall, the store shelves were full for the first time since Penelope's arrival. She stood in the middle of the room, looking around at the neat rows of goods, and felt pride swell in her chest. "Thank you," she said to Xander, who was leaning against the counter, watching her with those steady gray eyes. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "You could have," he said, "but I'm glad I was here to help. What will you do now? Go back to your cabin, eventually? Need to rest the horses first, maybe stay in town a day or two?" He pushed off from the counter. "But I'll be around if you need anything." "Xander, wait." Penelope crossed to him before she could lose her courage. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? A proper dinner, to celebrate the store being ready to open?" He studied her face for a long moment. "Are you asking me on a date, Miss Nash?" "I suppose I am." Penelope lifted her chin. "Are you going to say yes?" A slow smile spread across Xander's face, transforming his usually serious expression into something warm and almost boyish. "Yes, I'll say yes." "Good." Penelope smiled back, feeling giddy with relief and excitement. "I'll meet you at that same restaurant at 6 o'clock. After Xander left, Penelope danced around the store like a fool, hugging herself and grinning at the ceiling. She had a store full of quality goods, a grand opening planned for the next week, and a date with the most fascinating man she had ever met. Life in California was starting to look very promising indeed. The next evening, Penelope dressed with more care than she had in months, putting on her best dress, a dark green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinning her hair up with the silver combs her mother had given her. When she arrived at the restaurant, Xander was already there, waiting by the door. He had cleaned up too, his hair washed and tied back, his beard trimmed, wearing a clean shirt that looked new. He was breathtaking. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough with sincerity. "You look very handsome yourself," Penelope replied, taking his offered arm. Dinner was wonderful. They talked and laughed, sharing stories, arguing playfully about whether coffee or tea was superior, debating the merits of different types of timber. Xander was more relaxed than Penelope had ever seen him, the wariness that usually shadowed his eyes replaced with something lighter. She made him laugh several times, a deep booming sound that drew amused glances from other diners, and each time it felt like a victory. Over dessert, Xander reached across the table and took her hand. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I haven't felt this way in a very long time. Happy, I mean, comfortable with someone. I forgot what it was like." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "You did that just by being yourself, and I want you to know that it matters to me." "It matters to me too," Penelope said softly. "Everything about this matters to me." "I don't know what happens next," Xander admitted. "I still live in the mountains. You're building a life here in town. I don't see how those two things fit together. Maybe we don't worry about that yet. Maybe we just see where this goes, one day at a time." Penelope squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere. The store is here, I'm here. And you come to town for supplies anyway. We have time to figure things out." "You're being very reasonable about this." "One of us has to be," Penelope teased. "You're too busy being terrified." Xander laughed again. "Fair point." After dinner, they walked through Oroville's quiet streets, still holding hands. The night was cool and clear, and above them the stars stretched in an endless canopy. Xander walked her back to the store, and at the door he paused. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the fact that he asked rather than assuming made Penelope's heart melt. "Yes," she whispered. He cupped her face in his large hands, gentle despite their strength, and bent to kiss her. His lips were soft beneath the beard, tender and seeking, and Penelope felt like she was falling into something vast and wonderful. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said, though he made no move to leave. "You should," Penelope agreed, not wanting him to go at all. "Tomorrow," he said. "Can I see you tomorrow?" "Yes, come to the store in the morning. You can help me arrange the final displays before the opening." I'd like that. He kissed her once more, quick and sweet, then forced himself to step back. Good night, Penelope. Good night, Xander. She watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall figure gradually disappearing, and she hugged herself against the night chill, smiling like a fool. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. The store's grand opening was a success, with townspeople eager to see the new inventory and pleased by the fair prices and quality goods. Penelope made sales from dawn to dusk, barely able to keep up with demand. And every morning, Xander was there, helping her carry heavy items, reaching high shelves, intimidating the occasional customer who thought to argue about prices. His presence became a fixture, and the town began to accept seeing the mountain man around more often. Looks like Colton has found himself a reason to come to town more regular, Mrs. Chen said one afternoon, her eyes twinkling. Good for both of you. At night, after the store closed, Xander and Penelope would have dinner together, taking walks, talking about everything and nothing. He told her more about his life in the mountains, about the cabin he had built with his own hands, about the peace he found in the wilderness. She told him about her dreams for the store, about wanting to maybe add a lending library someday, about how much she loved watching the sunrise over the Sierra Nevada peaks. Come with me, Xander said one evening, 3 weeks after the store opened, up to my cabin for a few days. I want you to see where I live to understand that part of my life. Penelope hesitated. It was improper for an unmarried woman to visit a man's home unchaperoned, especially one so far from town, but propriety had never gotten her anything she truly wanted. Yes, she said, I want to see it. They left the next morning, Penelope arranging for Mrs. Chen to mind the store in her absence. The journey took most of the day, climbing up through dense forest on trails that barely deserved the name. But Xander navigated with the ease of long familiarity, and Penelope followed, trusting him completely. The cabin appeared as they crested a ridge, and Penelope caught her breath. It was small but beautifully crafted, built from hewn logs with a stone chimney, nestled in a clearing beside a creek. Behind it, mountains rose like cathedral walls, and the sound of distant falling water echoed through the valley. Xander, it's beautiful, Penelope said, awed. It's home. He dismounted and helped her down from her mare. Come on, I'll show you inside. The cabin's interior was simple but meticulously organized. A large bed in one corner, a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and books. Furs covered the floor, and the walls were chinked tight against winter cold. It was the home of someone who valued function and craftsmanship, and it was utterly Xander. You have books, Penelope said, surprised, examining the titles. Poetry, philosophy, natural history. I'm not completely uncivilized, Xander said with amusement. Reading helps pass the long winters. He cooked them dinner over the stove, venison stew with vegetables from a small garden behind the cabin. They ate on the porch, watching the sun set and paint the mountains gold and red. The silence was profound, broken only by the creek and evening birds, and Penelope understood for the first time why Xander loved it here. There was a peace in this place that went soul deep. I see why you never want to leave, she said softly. It's not that I never want to leave, Xander corrected. It's that I never had a reason to before. And now I have you, and that changes everything. He took her hand. I don't know how to make this work, Penelope. My life is here. Yours is in Oroville. Those are 2 different worlds. What if they don't have to be? Penelope turned to face him. What if you could have both? Come to town more often, spend time with me there. And I could come here sometimes, learn to live in your world too. We could build something that includes both our lives. You would do that. Come up here, leave your store behind regularly. The store can survive without me for a few days at a time, especially once I hire help. And I want to be part of your life, Xander. All of it, not just the part that fits neatly into town." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not asking you to give up the mountains. I'm asking you to share them with me." Xander pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "You're extraordinary, do you know that? Most women would demand I choose. You're trying to find a way we can both have what we need." "That's what people do when they love each other," Penelope said, then froze, realizing what she had just admitted. Xander pulled back to look at her face, his gray eyes searching hers. "You love me." "Yes," Penelope said, deciding there was no point in hiding it. "I know it's fast, I know it's impractical, but yes, I love you." "Thank God," Xander said, and kissed her with a passion that took her breath away. When he finally pulled back, he said, "I love you too. I've been trying not to, trying to convince myself it was too soon, too complicated. But I can't help it. You walked into my life and turned everything upside down, and I don't want to go back to how things were before." They stayed up late talking on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the mountain chill, making plans. Xander would come to town twice a month, stay a week each time. Penelope would come to the cabin whenever she could spare a few days. Eventually, maybe they would find a permanent solution, but for now, this would work. It had to work, because neither of them was willing to give up what they had found. That night, Penelope slept in Xander's bed while he took the floor, insisting on propriety even in the wilderness. But in the morning, she woke to find him making coffee, humming under his breath, and the domesticity of it made her heart full. They spent 3 perfect days at the cabin. Xander showed her how to fish, how to identify animal tracks, how to move quietly through the forest. He took her to Feather Falls, and they stood together at the base of the thundering cascade, mist soaking their faces, and Penelope felt like she was standing at the edge of something magnificent. They talked about everything, learned each other's rhythms and preferences, argued and laughed and kissed under the cathedral of ancient trees. On the 4th day, they returned to Oroville, and life settled into a new pattern. Xander came to town regularly, staying at the hotel but spending all his free time at Penelope's store or in her small apartment above it. He helped her build additional shelves, fixed a leak in her roof, scared off a drunk who tried to cause trouble. The town grew accustomed to seeing them together, and Mrs. Chen started making pointed comments about wedding bells. "She's not wrong, you know," Xander said one evening as they sat in Penelope's parlor, her feet in his lap while he absent-mindedly rubbed them. "We should probably get married." Penelope looked up from the ledger she was reviewing. "That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard." "I'm not good at romance," Xander protested. "No, you're not." Penelope closed the ledger and crawled across the sofa to straddle his lap, her hands on his broad shoulders. "So let me make this easy for you. Do you want to spend the rest of your life with me?" "Yes." "Do you want to wake up next to me every morning and go to sleep beside me every night?" "Yes." "Do you want to build a life together, whatever that looks like, wherever it takes us?" "Yes." His hands settled on her waist, holding her steady. "Then that's all that matters. Yes, Xander, I'll marry you, whenever you want, however you want." She kissed him softly. "Though I would like a proper proposal at some point just for the story." "I can do that," Xander said, grinning. "Give me a few days to plan something." 3 days later, Xander asked Penelope to accompany him on a ride, claiming he wanted to show her a new trail. She agreed, suspicious but playing along. He led her up into the foothills to a meadow filled with wildflowers, mountains rising all around them, and there in the center of all that beauty, he got down on one knee. "Penelope Nash, you are the bravest, smartest, most stubborn woman I've ever met. You took a chance on a rough mountain man and saw something in me worth loving. You've made me happier than I ever thought I could be, and you've given me a reason to believe in the future again. Will you marry me and be my wife, my partner, my best friend, for as long as we both shall live?" Tears streamed down Penelope's face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped a ring on her finger, a simple silver band with a small sapphire, and she knew he must have ridden all the way to Sacramento to buy it. Then he stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the meadow while she laughed and cried and held onto him like he was the most precious thing in the world. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church in Oroville, with Mrs. Chen and a handful of townspeople as witnesses. Penelope wore a new dress of cream-colored silk, and Xander wore his best clothes and looked terrified and happy in equal measure. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the audience dabbed at their eyes. The newlyweds decided to split their time between town and the cabin, finding a balance that worked for them both. Penelope hired a young widow named Sarah to help run the store, which gave her freedom to spend weeks at a time in the mountains with Xander. They built an addition onto the cabin, making it more comfortable for two people, and Penelope planted a larger garden. In town, Xander became a respected figure, his honesty and strength earning him friends despite his preference for solitude. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment. They argued sometimes about small things, learning each other's boundaries and needs. Xander had to learn to communicate rather than retreat into silence when something bothered him. Penelope had to learn when to push and when to give him space. But they worked through every conflict with honesty and love, and their bond grew stronger for it. The second year brought prosperity. The store thrived under Penelope's management and Sarah's cheerful customer service. Xander started guiding hunting parties through the mountains, using his wilderness skills to earn extra income. They saved money with dreams of the future, talking late into the night about possibilities. 2 years after their wedding, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Xander one morning at the cabin, watching his face transform from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the space of heartbeats. "Are you sure?" he asked, his large hands hovering over her still flat belly. "As sure as I can be. We're going to have a baby, Xander." He dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her stomach, his arms wrapping around her hips. "A baby," he whispered. "We're having a baby." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Penelope was sick for months, and Xander hovered anxiously, trying to help while feeling useless. They decided she should stay primarily in town where the doctor could check on her regularly, and Xander moved to town for those months, unable to be apart from her. He was there for every moment of discomfort, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her hair when morning sickness struck, reading to her when she couldn't sleep. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1881, after hours of labor that terrified Xander and exhausted Penelope. But when the doctor placed the squalling infant in her arms, all the pain vanished in the wonder of holding their child. He was perfect, with Xander's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair, and they named him James, after Penelope's father. Xander was a devoted father, his gentleness with the tiny baby almost comical given his size. He would sit for hours with James on his chest, the infant looking impossibly small against his massive frame, talking to his son about mountains and trees and all the things he would teach him someday. "I never thought I could have this," Xander admitted one night as they lay in bed with James sleeping in a cradle beside them. "A family, a home, someone to love who loves me back. I thought I was too broken, too far gone. You proved me wrong." "You were never broken," Penelope said softly. "Just hurting. There's a difference." As James grew from infant to toddler, they developed a rhythm. Summers were spent at the cabin, where James learned to walk on mountain trails and fell asleep to the sound of creek water. Winters were in town, where Penelope ran the store and Xander helped with everything from stocking shelves to making deliveries. James was a happy child, equally content playing in the store or exploring the wilderness with his father. When James was 3, Penelope became pregnant again. This time she carried easier, and their daughter Margaret was born in the cabin with only Xander and a midwife from a nearby settlement attending. She was small and fierce, with blonde hair and her mother's green eyes, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the first moment. The years passed in a blur of happiness. James grew tall and strong like his father, developing that same quiet competence in the wilderness. Margaret was fearless and stubborn, determined to keep up with her older brother no matter what. They added another room to the cabin, expanded the store in town, built a life that was uniquely theirs, split between two worlds but whole in all the ways that mattered. When Penelope was 32 and Xander 35, they had another son, Daniel, who arrived unexpectedly early one September morning. He was the most easygoing of their children, happy wherever he was as long as his family was nearby. The store continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of Oroville's economy. Penelope's insistence on quality goods and fair prices earned her loyalty from customers throughout the region. She never forgot how close she had come to buying Mortimer Lansing's faulty merchandise, and she made it her mission to protect others from similar schemes. Lansing himself had left town not long after Penelope's marriage, his reputation ruined after several customers sued him for fraud. Xander had made sure everyone knew about the exploded rifle and other defective goods, and Lansing's business had crumbled. Last anyone heard, he was trying to work similar schemes in Nevada, but word of his dishonesty traveled faster than he did. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander took Penelope back to the meadow where he had proposed. The children were with Mrs. Chen for the weekend, giving them rare time alone. They spread a blanket under the stars and lay together talking about the decade they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked. "Tying yourself to a mountain man when you could have had an easier life with someone else?" "Never," Penelope said firmly. "You gave me exactly the life I needed, Xander. Adventure and security, wilderness and home, passion and partnership. I couldn't have asked for anything more. I love you," he said, pulling her close. "More now than the day we married, if that's possible." "It's possible," Penelope assured him, "because I feel the same way." They made love under the stars in the meadow where he had proposed, and afterward lay wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the night sounds of the mountains Xander loved, and Penelope had learned to love just as much. The children grew. James became a skilled hunter and tracker, following in his father's footsteps. At 18, he started his own guiding business, leading wealthy tourists through the Sierra Nevada. Margaret surprised everyone by developing a head for numbers, and at 16, she was helping her mother with the store's accounts, finding ways to improve efficiency and increase profits. Daniel, quieter than his siblings, showed an artistic bent, spending hours sketching the mountains and wildlife around their cabin. When Penelope was 40, she and Xander decided to build a permanent home halfway between Oroville and the cabin, a compromise that let them have the best of both worlds. It was a beautiful house, built by Xander with James's help, large enough for their family and positioned to take advantage of mountain views while remaining accessible to town. The store remained successful, now managed primarily by Margaret with Penelope in an advisory role. The cabin became a retreat, a place to escape to when they needed solitude. On Penelope's 45th birthday, Xander organized a surprise party with all their friends and family. As she looked around the crowded house at the life they had built, at their grown children laughing with neighbors, at Mrs. Chen sitting in a place of honor, at Sarah and her own family who had become like relatives, Penelope felt overwhelming gratitude. That night, after everyone had left and they were alone in their bedroom, Xander held her close and said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For taking a chance on me all those years ago. For seeing something worth loving in a rough mountain man who didn't know how to be with people. For building this life with me." His voice was thick with emotion. "Everything good in my life comes from you." "That's not true," Penelope protested. "You were always good, Xander. You just needed someone to remind you of it." "Maybe, but you were that someone. You saved me in ways you'll never fully understand." Penelope turned in his arms to face him, her hands framing his still handsome face, now lined with age and experience. "And you saved me. You kept me from making a terrible business mistake, yes, but more than that, you showed me what real love looks like. Patient and kind and honest. You gave me a family and a home and adventures I never dreamed possible. We saved each other, Xander. That's what love does." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of decades of devotion. They had weathered storms together, raised children, built businesses, made a life from nothing but determination and love. And they would continue on together, hand in hand, for as many years as they were granted. James married at 23, a sensible woman named Catherine, who shared his love of the outdoors. They gave Penelope and Xander their first grandchild, a boy they named Xander James. And Penelope cried watching her husband hold his namesake with the same gentle wonder he had shown their own children. Margaret married at 25, choosing a schoolteacher named Robert who matched her in intelligence and ambition. They moved to Sacramento, where Robert taught and Margaret opened her own store using everything she had learned from her mother. They visited often, bringing their 2 daughters to run wild in the mountains their mother had loved as a child. Daniel never married, content with his art and his solitude. He built a small cabin near his parents' home and made a living selling paintings of Sierra Nevada landscapes to tourists and galleries. He was happy in his independence, and Penelope recognized in him something of who Xander had been before they met. Someone complete unto themselves, who didn't need conventional relationships to feel fulfilled. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Xander and Penelope returned once more to the meadow. They were in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their bodies showing the wear of hard-working lives. But they climbed the trail together with the ease of long practice, and when they reached the meadow, still full of wildflowers after all these years, they stood together looking at the mountains. 30 years, Penelope said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday and like forever, all at once. Best 30 years of my life, Xander said. Every single day with you has been a gift, even the days we fought, especially those days, because we always came back to each other. He pulled her into his arms. You know what I think about sometimes? That salesman who tried to cheat you. If he hadn't been such a snake, if his goods had been legitimate, you might have bought from him. And I never would have had a reason to offer to help you. We might never have gotten to know each other. I don't believe that, Penelope said. I think we were meant to find each other somehow. Maybe not that exact way, but somehow. Some people are just meant to be together, and we're 2 of those people. I like that idea, Xander admitted. Fate bringing us together, not fate. Love. Love has a way of finding us when we need it most. Penelope stood on her toes to kiss him. You needed someone to remind you that you deserved happiness. I needed someone to show me what true partnership looked like, and we found each other at exactly the right time. They stood in the meadow until sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Two people who had built a life of love and purpose from the most unlikely beginnings. A city woman and a mountain man, brought together by a dishonest salesman and quality goods, held together by honesty, respect, and a love that had only deepened with time. As they walked back down the trail in the gathering darkness, hand in hand as they had been for 30 years, Penelope looked back once at the meadow where their future had truly begun. Thank you, she thought, to whatever force had brought them together. Thank you for giving me exactly the life I needed, and Xander, as if reading her thoughts, squeezed her hand and said, Thank you for saying yes to that first trip to Sacramento. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything. Always, Penelope promised. For as long as we both shall live, and probably beyond that too. They laughed together in the darkness, and the sound echoed off the mountains, carrying their joy into the vast wilderness that had witnessed their love story from the very beginning. They had decades more ahead of them, filled with grandchildren and new adventures, with quiet moments and grand celebrations, with the everyday magic of a life built on truth and trust and love. And when their time finally came, many years later, they would go together as they had done everything else, hand in hand into whatever came next. But that was far in the future. For now, they had each other, they had their family, they had the mountains and the store and all the beautiful complexity of a life fully lived. Penelope Nash Colton and Xander Colton, the determined businesswoman and the protective mountain man, had found their happily ever after against all odds. And it was better than either of them could have imagined on that dusty afternoon in Oroville, when he had first warned her about faulty goods and offered to help a stranger in need. Love, it turned out, was the highest quality good of all, and they had found it in each other. Everything else was just details.